Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. Location: Voyageurs National Park, Minnesota. Date: November 18, 2016. The coffee had gone cold in Nathan's thermos by the time he noticed. He'd been standing at the edge of Kabetogama Lake for nearly 20 minutes, watching the gray water lap against the rocky shore in a rhythm that felt slower than it should. November had come hard to Voyageurs this year, stripping the birches and aspens bare 2 weeks ahead of schedule, leaving the park in that strange transitional state between autumn's death and winter's dominion. The sky hung low and heavy, the color of old pewter, pressing down on the 1,000 lakes and islands that made up this waterlogged wilderness. Nathan had worked this park for 6 years now, and he'd learned to read its moods the way some people read faces. Today, the park felt like it was holding its breath. He poured the cold coffee onto the ground and screwed the cap back on, tucking the thermos into his day pack. The morning patrol had been uneventful so far. A quick check of the Ash River Visitor Center, verification that the boat launches were properly secured for the approaching freeze, a brief conversation with old Tom Redhawk, who ran the bait shop just outside park boundaries and always had opinions about the weather. Tom had been unusually quiet today, though, kept glancing toward the tree line like he was expecting someone. When Nathan asked if everything was all right, Tom had just shaken his head and said something about how the animals were moving wrong this year. Heading south too early, he'd muttered, like they know something's coming. Nathan had dismissed it as the old man's usual superstition. Tom's grandmother had been Ojibwe, and he'd grown up on stories that Nathan filed under local color, useful for entertaining tourists, not much else. But now, standing alone at the water's edge with that oppressive gray sky bearing down, Nathan found himself thinking about the way the loons had gone silent over the past week. Usually they stayed until the lake started freezing, their eerie calls echoing across the water through the cold nights. This year, they'd left early, all of them seemingly overnight. His radio crackled, startling him from his thoughts. Unit 7, this is dispatch, you copy? Nathan keyed the mic. Dispatch, Unit 7. Go ahead. Nathan, we've got a vehicle registration check request. Blue Subaru Outback, plate number Minnesota Alpha Victor 7321. Vehicle's been in the Wooden Frog campground lot since yesterday morning. No reservation on file, no backcountry permit issued. Can you swing by and check it out? Copy that, dispatch. I'm about 15 minutes out. Any description on the registered owner? Registered to Maya Chen, 28 years old, Minneapolis address. We tried the emergency contact listed, her sister, but no answer yet. Nathan felt that familiar tightening in his chest, the one that came with every welfare check that might turn into something worse. I'm en route. Unit 7 out. He made his way back to the patrol truck, boots crunching on the frost-hardened ground. The temperature had dropped noticeably even in the short time he'd been standing by the lake. His breath came out in visible puffs now, and the moisture in the air had that particular bite that preceded freezing rain. He checked the weather report on his phone before pulling out. The system was moving faster than predicted. What had been forecast as light rain was now expected to transition to sleet by early afternoon, with temperatures plummeting into the 20s by nightfall. If Maya Chen was out there somewhere, she'd picked one hell of a day to go missing. The drive to Wooden Frog campground took him along the winding park roads, past stands of white pine and paper birch that stood like pale sentinels against the darkening sky. Most of the leaves were gone now, and Nathan could see deep into the forest in a way that wasn't possible during summer. All those secret spaces revealed, the understory laid bare. It should have made the woods feel more open, more knowable. Instead, it made him feel exposed, as if the forest could now see him just as clearly as he could see it. He found the Subaru exactly where dispatch had described, parked at the far end of the Wooden Frog lot, nose facing the trailhead that led to the Cruiser Lake Trail system. Nathan pulled up beside it and killed the engine, sitting for a moment to observe. The car was covered in a fine layer of frost and dead leaves, definitely been here more than just overnight. He could see a day pack on the passenger seat, a water bottle in the cup holder, and what looked like a journal or sketchbook on the dashboard. On the windshield, tucked under the wiper blade, was a handwritten note that made his stomach drop. Back by 4 p.m. Tuesday. If I'm not, something went wrong. Please call my sister. M. It was Friday. Nathan radioed in his findings, then pulled on his gloves and approached the vehicle. He shined his flashlight through the windows, cataloging everything he could see. The sketchbook on the dashboard was open to a half-finished drawing, a detailed rendering of the rock formations along the Cruiser Lake shoreline, the pencil work delicate and skilled. Beside it sat a nature guide to Minnesota fungi, bristling with post-it notes. Maya Chen had come here to draw, to explore, to immerse herself in the wilderness. She'd done everything right. Left a note, told someone her plans, set a reasonable return time. And still. Nathan signed in at the trailhead register. The last entry was Maya's, dated Tuesday morning. Her handwriting was neat. Her intended destination listed as Cruiser Lake and surrounding trails day hike. 3 days ago. 3 days in November, with temperatures dropping each night, with no gear visible in her car beyond a light day pack. He felt the cold seeping through his jacket and tried not to think about what 3 nights of exposure would do to a person. Dispatch, Unit 7. Go ahead, 7. I'm starting a foot search from the Cruiser Lake trailhead. Victim left a note indicating she expected to return Tuesday. That's 3 days overdue. I'm requesting SAR activation and additional units. Copy, 7. I'm logging that now. Be advised. Weather's deteriorating faster than expected. You've got maybe 2 hours before conditions become hazardous. Don't go too deep. Understood. Unit 7 out. Nathan shouldered his pack and started up the trail. The first mile was easygoing, a well-maintained path through mixed forest that eventually opened onto the rocky shoreline of Cruiser Lake. This was popular hiking territory in summer and fall, but by mid-November, most visitors had retreated to warmer pursuits. Nathan passed no one on the trail, saw no fresh footprints in the frost-crusted mud, just his own boots breaking the silence of the forest. And it was silent. That was the first thing that registered as wrong. No bird song, no squirrel chatter, no wind through the bare branches. Nathan stopped walking and stood perfectly still, listening. Nothing. Not even the distant hum of a plane overhead or the whisper of water against the lakeshore. It was as if someone had wrapped the forest in cotton, muffling every sound except his own heartbeat, which suddenly seemed very loud. He shook off the unease and continued on. The trail curved around a granite outcropping and descended toward the lake. And it was here that Nathan found the first sign of Maya Chen. A single hiking boot, women's size 7 or 8, lying in the middle of the path as if it had been dropped mid-stride. No scuff marks, no sign of struggle. Just a boot, sitting upright and waiting, the laces still tied. Maya had been sketching the lichen patterns on a fallen log when she first heard her name. Maya. She looked up, startled. The voice had come from somewhere to her left, deeper in the forest, away from the trail. It sounded like her sister, like Lily, that particular rising inflection she used when she was looking for something. But Lily was in Minneapolis, 150 miles south. Lily didn't even know exactly where Maya had gone, just up north to sketch, the vague direction she always gave when she needed to disappear into nature for a few days. "Hello?" Maya called back, her voice sounding thin and small against the vast silence of the trees. No response, just that heavy quiet pressing in from all sides. She checked her phone. No signal, as expected. The park was notorious for dead zones. She'd been hiking for about 4 hours, moving slowly, stopping frequently to draw or photograph interesting formations. The light was starting to change, shifting from the cold white of overcast morning to something grayer, flatter. She should start heading back. The trail to the parking lot was clearly marked, and she had plenty of time before sunset. Maya packed up her sketchbook and started back the way she'd come. The path was easy to follow, the same granite outcroppings and distinctive birch stands she'd passed on the way in. Everything looked familiar. Everything was exactly as it should be, except that after 20 minutes of walking, she passed the same fallen log she'd been sketching. The exact same log, with the exact same lichen patterns, her own boot prints still visible in the soft earth beside it. Maya stopped. She looked back the way she'd come, then forward at the trail ahead. She'd been walking in a straight line. The trail didn't loop here. She'd checked the map this morning, traced her route with her finger to commit it to memory. This was a point-to-point hike, not a circuit. Maya. The voice again, closer now. Still Lily's voice, but wrong somehow. The pitch was right, the timbre was right, but the rhythm was off. Syllables held a fraction of a second too long, pauses in strange places. Like someone reading phonetically from a script they didn't understand. "Who's there?" Maya's voice cracked. She reached for her phone again, a reflex, knowing it was useless. "Maya, I found something. Come see." It was Lily's voice. It was exactly Lily's voice. But Lily couldn't be here. Lily was afraid of the woods, had been ever since they were children. Ever since that summer at camp when she'd gotten lost for 3 hours and came back unable to stop shaking. Maya started walking faster, not toward the voice but away from it, back toward where she thought the parking lot should be. Her breath was coming quick now, visible puffs of white in the cold air. The temperature had dropped sharply in the last hour. She could feel it biting through her fleece, numbing her fingers where they gripped her trekking poles. The trees looked wrong. That was the only way to describe it. They looked wrong. The birches that had seemed welcoming this morning now appeared to lean toward the trail, their bare branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. The spaces between the trunks were too dark, too deep, as if the forest extended infinitely in all directions with no end and no light. And then she saw it, just for a moment at the edge of her vision, something tall and thin standing between two pines, something that was almost the shape of a person but stretched, elongated, its proportions all wrong. When she turned to look directly at it, there was nothing there, just trees, just shadows. Maya ran. Nathan found the second boot a quarter-mile further down the trail, this one lying on its side at the base of a cedar tree. Beyond it, the trail showed signs of disturbance, broken branches, disturbed leaf litter, deep gouges in the mud that might have been footprints or might have been something dragged. He photographed everything, marking GPS coordinates on his handheld unit, trying to maintain the professional detachment that 6 years of wilderness rescue had taught him. But his hands were shaking, not from the cold. The sleet had started, a fine icy mist that coated everything in a glaze of frozen moisture. Nathan pulled up his hood and pressed on, following the disturbed trail off the main path and into the deeper forest. The trees here were older, thicker, a mix of white pine and northern red oak that blocked what little light remained in the sky. The ground was covered in a thick carpet of dead leaves that muffled his footsteps, making him feel like he was walking in a dream. Dispatch Unit 7. I found evidence of a possible victim off-trail, approximately 1.5 miles from the Cruiser Lake trailhead. Requesting immediate SAR deployment to my GPS coordinates. Static. Then, faintly, even copy, breaking up. Dispatch, do you copy? I need SAR at my location. Nothing. Just the hiss of dead air and beneath it something else, a sound like breathing, slow and deep, coming from the radio itself. Nathan switched channels, tried again, same result. His radio had never failed here before. The coverage in this section of the park was usually solid. He checked the battery, full charge, checked the antenna, secure. Everything was working. Everything should be working. The breathing sound continued, barely audible beneath the static. Nathan turned the radio off. He stood in the silence of the frozen forest, sleet clicking against his jacket, and tried to decide what to do. Protocol said to return to the trailhead, wait for backup, don't proceed alone into unknown conditions. But the evidence trail was fresh, the disturbance recent. Maya Chen might be injured somewhere ahead, might be hypothermic, might be dying while he stood here following procedure. A sound reached him through the trees, a voice high and thin, calling something he couldn't quite make out. It sounded like a woman. It sounded like it was coming from just over the next ridge. Nathan started walking. The forest seemed to close in around him as he moved deeper, the spaces between the trees narrowing, the canopy thickening despite the bare branches. The sleet was heavier now, coating the ground in a treacherous layer of ice. Each step required careful attention. A twisted ankle out here could be as deadly as any other threat. He found Maya's day pack at the edge of a small clearing, its contents scattered across the frozen ground. Granola bars, a water bottle, a first aid kit, that sketchbook he'd seen in her car. Nathan knelt and picked up the sketchbook, flipping through the pages. Detailed drawings of trees, rocks, fungi, birds. Beautiful work, meticulous and loving. The last page with any drawing on it was dated Tuesday. A half-finished sketch of a figure standing between two trees. Tall, impossibly thin, with limbs that bent at wrong angles. Maya had written something beneath it, the handwriting shaky and uneven. It knows my name. It sounds like Lily, but it's not Lily. It's been following since morning. I don't think the trail goes anywhere anymore. Nathan's blood went cold. Nathan. He spun around, hand going to the bear spray on his belt. The voice had come from behind him, from the direction he'd just walked. It was a voice he knew. Frank Morrison, the ranger who worked the Ash River station. But Frank was on vacation. Frank was in Florida, visiting his grandkids. Nathan, I found her. She's hurt. Come quick. The voice was Frank's. Every cadence, every rough edge, every note of concern. But Frank called him Nate, always had. A friendly abbreviation born from their first week working together. Never Nathan, not once in 6 years. Nathan didn't respond. He stood perfectly still, barely breathing, watching the trees for movement. Nathan. The voice again, closer. Don't you want to help her? She's been waiting for you. She's been waiting so long. Something moved in his peripheral vision, something tall and pale, sliding between the pines with a horrible fluid grace. Nathan didn't turn to look directly at it. Some instinct, some ancient survival mechanism buried deep in his brainstem, told him that looking directly at it would be a mistake. He backed away slowly, keeping his eyes fixed on the middle distance, watching for movement without focusing on any single point. The sleet was freezing on his face now, tiny needles of ice stinging his exposed skin. His breath came in ragged gasps, each exhale a plume of white vapor that hung in the still air. She drew me, the voice said, and it wasn't Frank anymore. It was Lily, the sister Maya had written about. She saw me watching, and she drew me. That's when I knew she was ready. That's when I knew she was mine. Nathan ran. He crashed through the underbrush, not caring about the noise, not caring about the ice-slicked ground or the branches that whipped across his face. Behind him, he heard something following. Not the heavy footfalls of a person, but something lighter, faster, a skittering sound like dry branches scraping together. He didn't look back. He couldn't look back. The trail appeared ahead of him, familiar and solid, and Nathan burst onto it with a sob of relief. He ran until his lungs burned, until the cold air felt like knives in his chest, until he could see the gray shape of the parking lot through the trees. He made it to his truck and sat there for a long time, shaking, watching the tree line through the windshield. The sleet had turned to freezing rain now, coating the windows in a layer of ice that blurred the world outside into an impressionist smear of gray and white. His radio crackled. Unit 7, this is dispatch. Do you copy? Nathan grabbed the mic with trembling hands. Dispatch, Unit 7, I copy. What's your status? We lost contact for almost an hour. An hour. He'd been out there for an hour. It had felt like minutes, like seconds. I found evidence of the missing hiker. Daypack, personal effects, signs of... He stopped, unsure how to continue. Signs of flight. I need SAR at the Cruiser Lake trailhead immediately. And dispatch. Advise all units to avoid solo patrols in the Cruiser Lake area until further notice. Copy 7. SR is being mobilized. Are you injured? Negative. Just get them here fast. They searched for 5 days. Brought in dogs, helicopters, volunteer teams from 3 counties. They found Maya Chen's other shoe, a single glove, and her phone. Dead. The screen cracked. the GPS showing a route that spiraled inward on itself like a nautilus shell, eventually ending at a point that corresponded to nothing but deep forest, miles from any trail. They never found Maya. Nathan gave his statement to the investigation team, most of it anyway. He told them about the boots, the scattered pack, the disturbed trail. He mentioned the radio interference, attributed it to weather conditions. He said nothing about the voices, about the figure in the trees, about the sketchbook entry that had made his blood freeze. He kept the sketchbook. He's not sure why. Some nights when sleep won't come, he takes it out and looks at that last drawing, the tall, thin figure with the wrong proportions, watching from between the pines. Sometimes he thinks the figure has moved slightly on the page. Sometimes he thinks the head has turned, just a fraction of an inch, as if it's looking back at him. Tom Redhawk stopped by the station last week, asked Nathan if he'd heard anything strange in the deep woods lately. Any voices that didn't belong? Nathan told him no. But sometimes, late at night when the wind blows just right, he hears Maya Chen's voice coming from somewhere in the darkness beyond his cabin window. She's calling for help, she says. She's so close, she just needs him to open the door. Nathan keeps the door locked. He's learned not to listen, but the voice keeps calling. And some nights it sounds almost like it's learning his name. Location: Voyageurs National Park, Minnesota. Date: October 27, 2019. The fog came in low across Kabetogama Lake that Sunday morning, rolling over the dark water like something alive, something with purpose. Garrett Walsh stood on the dock behind the Ash River Visitor Center and watched it move, coffee steaming in his hands, the warmth barely registering against the cold that had settled into his bones overnight. 23 degrees at dawn. The thermometer on the station wall had confirmed what his joints already knew. Winter was no longer approaching. It had arrived. Voyageurs in late October was a different world than the summer park that drew families in houseboats and kayakers seeking the Boundary Waters experience. Now the lakes were beginning their slow freeze, thin ice forming in the sheltered bays while the main channels remained open, black and depthless. The birches had shed their gold weeks ago, standing skeletal against the evergreen darkness of the boreal forest. Most of the seasonal staff had gone home. The campgrounds were closed. What remained was silence, water, and approximately 18,000 acres of interconnected wilderness that answered to no one. Garrett had worked Voyageurs for 7 years now, long enough to know its moods, its seasons, its particular ways of testing those who presumed to manage it. He knew the sound of wolves calling across Rainy Lake at midnight. He knew how the northern lights could turn the snow purple and green on clear January nights. He knew, too, the stories the Ojibwe elders told, the ones the Park Service didn't include in the interpretive materials. Stories about things that lived in the in-between places, the spaces where water met land, met sky, where the boundaries grew thin. He finished his coffee and went inside to begin the morning protocols. Radio check with the Rainy Lake station came first, then Crane Lake. Both reported quiet nights, no incidents, no visitors registered for backcountry permits. Garrett logged the communications, checked the weather service updates, fog through midday, clearing by afternoon, chance of snow squalls after dark, and reviewed the patrol schedule. With only 3 rangers covering the entire park until the ice roads opened in January, they each carried responsibility for vast stretches of territory. Today, Garrett had the Kabetogama Peninsula, a roadless expanse accessible only by water, dotted with primitive campsites that should have been empty this time of year. Should have been. He was organizing his pack when dispatch crackled through with something unexpected. A vehicle had been reported in the Wooden Frog campground parking area for 3 days now. A silver Honda CR-V, Minnesota plates. No one had checked in at any station. No backcountry permit on file. Copy that, dispatch. I'll take a look on my morning run. Probably just someone who didn't know the campground closed October 15th. Appreciated, Unit 12. Let us know what you find. Garrett added a welfare check to his mental list and headed for the boat launch. The patrol boat, A 22-foot aluminum workboat with a center console sat waiting in the gray morning light. He ran through his equipment check methodically. Fuel topped off, radio functioning, GPS unit showing proper satellite acquisition, emergency beacon secured in the console compartment, life jacket on, kill switch lanyard attached to his belt. The routines were ingrained now, automatic as breathing, but he never skipped them. The lakes had taken better men than him, men who cut corners, who trusted the water when they shouldn't have. The engine caught on the first try, and Garrett idled out past the no-wake buoys before opening the throttle. The fog swallowed the shore behind him within seconds. Brooke Hendricks had arrived at Voyagers 3 days earlier with a plan that seemed reasonable at the time. She was a wildlife photographer based in Duluth, and she'd heard from a contact at the Minnesota DNR that a pack of wolves had been spotted on the Kabetogama Peninsula, denning earlier than usual. The shot she wanted, wolves against the first snow, the fog rising off the lakes behind them, could anchor her portfolio for years, could get her the National Geographic assignment she'd been chasing since graduate school. She'd known the campgrounds were closed. She'd known she should have filed for a backcountry permit, but permits meant questions, and questions meant rangers suggesting she wait for better conditions, and better conditions meant missing the wolves entirely. So she'd parked at Wooden Frog, loaded her kayak with 3 days of supplies, and paddled out toward the peninsula before dawn on Thursday morning. The first 2 days had been exactly what she'd hoped for. She'd found a sheltered cove on the peninsula's western shore, set up her cold weather camp, and spent hours glassing the tree line for movement. She'd heard the wolves on the first night, their calls echoing across the water, closer than she'd expected. She'd photographed tracks in the frost, scat still steaming in the cold air, claw marks on a birch that stood sentinel at the edge of a small clearing. But she hadn't photographed the lights. They'd appeared on the second night, after the fog rolled in, small and flickering like distant lanterns moving through the trees on the ridge above her camp. Brooke had watched them for nearly an hour, telling herself they must be other campers, though how they'd gotten there she couldn't imagine. Or perhaps some phenomenon of swamp gas, methane from the bogs igniting in the cold air. When the lights had seemed to drift closer, she'd retreated to her tent, zipped the rainfly tight, and tried to sleep. The dreams that came were strange. She was walking through forest that looked like Voyageurs but wasn't. Trees growing too close together. The spacing wrong. The species mixed in ways that didn't occur in nature. And there were figures in the trees. Small figures, man-shaped but wrong in their proportions, watching her with eyes that caught light where no light should be. In the dream, they were laughing. The sound was not human laughter. She'd woken before dawn on the third day. Yesterday now, though time had grown slippery in her mind, and found her kayak missing. Garrett found the Honda exactly where dispatch had described it, alone in the Wooden Frog lot, frost thick on the windshield. He circled the vehicle, noting the Duluth parking permit on the rear bumper, the camera equipment bag visible through the rear window. The driver's door was unlocked. Inside, he found a wallet with ID, Brooke Hendricks, age 31, and a detailed topographic map of the Kabetogama Peninsula with a cove on the western shore circled in red ink. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch Unit 12, I've got a confirmed ID on that vehicle. Brooke Hendricks, Duluth address. Looks like she might have kayaked out to the peninsula. No permit on file?" "Negative, Unit 12. No permit. No registration at any station." "Copy. I'm heading out to check the western shore." She circled a location on a map. "Looks like about 2 miles southwest of Anderson Bay." "Understood. Check in at regular intervals. Weather Service is updating the fog advisory. Visibility dropping." Garrett pocketed the map and returned to his boat. The fog was thicker now than when he'd launched, visibility down to perhaps 50 yards. He navigated by GPS and memory, throttling back to avoid the submerged rocks that lurked beneath the surface this time of year, when the water levels dropped, and hazards that summer boaters never saw rose like teeth from the lake bed. The western shore of the peninsula materialized slowly from the gray, a dark line of spruce and birch, boulders crusted with ice where the waves lapped against the ancient Canadian shield granite. Garrett killed the engine and let the boat drift, listening. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft lap of water against aluminum and the distant mournful call of a loon somewhere in the fog. Then he heard something else. A voice, maybe, high and thin, carried on air that seemed to come from no particular direction. "Hello?" The word dissipated before he could locate its source. Garrett waited, hand on the radio, straining to hear. Nothing. Just the water and the fog and the feeling, sudden and unwelcome, that something was watching him from the tree line. He shook it off. Sound carried strangely across water, especially in fog. Acoustic tricks happened constantly in the boundary waters, echoes bouncing off cliffs, whispers traveling miles, silence that seemed to swallow screams. He'd experienced it all before, but he'd never felt watched before. Not like this. Garrett pulled out his binoculars and scanned the shore, searching for any sign of a camp, a kayak, a person. The fog revealed only trees and stone, the landscape ancient and indifferent. He checked his GPS. The circled location on Hendrick's map was about a quarter-mile south. He motored slowly along the shore, watching, listening. The feeling of being observed intensified, a pressure between his shoulder blades, a certainty that refused to attach itself to any evidence. Twice he spun to look behind him, finding only the gray wall of fog closing in his wake. The cove appeared suddenly, a small inlet protected by a granite outcropping on either side. And there, pulled up on the rocky beach, he saw the kayak. It was overturned, wedged between two boulders in a way that suggested force, not the careful placement of someone making camp, but the desperate hauling of someone fleeing the water. Garrett beached his boat beside it and stepped onto shore, hand moving instinctively to the bear spray on his belt. Not that it would help with what the quiet part of his mind was beginning to suspect. "Ms. Hendricks, Brooke Hendricks, National Park Service." His voice vanished into the fog. No echo returned. The trees seemed to lean in, listening. Brooke had spent most of the third day searching for her kayak, moving along the shore in widening arcs, calling out for help that never came. By afternoon, she'd accepted that the kayak wasn't lost. It had been taken, moved, hidden somewhere she couldn't reach. The logical part of her mind, the part that had gotten her through a master's degree in wildlife biology and years of solo fieldwork, insisted there had to be an explanation. An animal, perhaps. Wolves were known to investigate human camps, to drag off equipment. But wolves didn't hide kayaks. Wolves didn't move things with purpose. By evening, the fog had returned, thicker than before, and with it the lights. They were closer now. She could see them moving through the trees no more than 100 yards from her camp, flickering in patterns that almost seemed like communication. And beneath the lights, she could hear something. Footsteps maybe, though the rhythm was wrong. Too quick, too light, like something running on feet that weren't meant for running. Brooke had backed into her tent, clutching her bear spray with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. She'd tried her phone, no signal, as expected, and her emergency beacon, but the device's light stayed dark no matter how many times she pressed the activation button. The batteries, she thought. The batteries must have died, except she'd checked them before leaving Duluth. They'd been full. The footsteps circled the tent, 3 times around, then stopping, then starting again. Somewhere in the forest, something laughed. When dawn came, gray and fog-choked, Brooke abandoned her camp and ran. She didn't know where she was running. Inland, away from the water that should have been her escape route, deeper into a peninsula that had no roads, no trails, no help. The trees closed around her. The fog swallowed the sun, and the lights followed. Garrett found the camp a quarter-mile from the shore, following a trail of abandoned equipment. A lens cap here, a dropped water bottle there, as if someone had been fleeing and shedding weight as they ran. The tent still stood, but the fabric was torn, 3 long gashes running diagonally across the rainfly. The cuts were too clean for any animal Garrett could name. "Dispatch, Unit 12. I've located the Hendricks camp on the peninsula. No sign of the subject, but I've got evidence of..." He paused. What did he have evidence of? "Possible wildlife encounter. I'm going to push inland, see if I can locate her." "Copy, Unit 12. Be advised, fog is intensifying. Visibility at Ash River is down to 20 feet. Snow expected within 2 hours." Understood. Maintaining radio contact. He moved through the trees slowly, following the scattered trail of a person in panic. The silence here was absolute in a way that felt intentional. No birds, no squirrels, not even the wind through the branches. Just Garrett's own breathing and the crunch of his boots on the frost-hardened ground. Then, through the fog, he heard her voice. "Help! Please help me!" He broke into a run before the rational part of his mind could stop him. The voice had come from somewhere ahead, maybe 50 yards, maybe more. He crashed through undergrowth, ducked beneath low branches, stumbled over roots that seemed to rise up deliberately to catch his feet. "Brooke! Brooke Hendricks! Keep calling out!" "Here! I'm here! Please!" The voice cut off mid-word. Garrett skidded to a stop, breathing hard, and found himself standing at the edge of a clearing he knew shouldn't exist. He'd patrolled this peninsula for years. He knew every trail, every notable feature. There was no clearing here. But here it was. A perfect circle of bare earth, perhaps 30 feet across, surrounded by trees that grew too close together, their branches interweaving in patterns that looked almost deliberate. In the center of the clearing stood Brooke Hendricks. She was facing away from him, perfectly still, her arms hanging at her sides. Her photographer's vest was torn, her hair wild with twigs and leaves. She didn't move when he called her name. "Ms. Hendricks? Brooke? I'm Ranger Walsh. I'm here to help you." She turned, and Garrett's blood went cold. Her face was wrong. Not injured, not disfigured. Wrong. The proportions were slightly off. The eyes too wide set. The smile too broad. The teeth behind it too numerous. She looked at him with something that wanted to be recognition but fell short, a mask of humanity worn by something that didn't quite understand the shape. "Help," she said, and the word came out in Brooke's voice, but the mouth didn't move quite right. The sync was off like a badly dubbed film. "I'm here. Please." Garrett stepped backward. His hand found his radio. "I found her," the thing wearing Brooke's face said, and now the smile was growing wider still, stretching beyond the boundaries of what a human face should allow. "I found her for you. She's here. She's here." And then, from the trees surrounding the clearing, the lights emerged. There were dozens of them, small and flickering, bobbing through the fog like lanterns carried by invisible hands. But as they drew closer, Garrett could see what carried them. Figures. Small figures, 3 feet tall at most, with bodies like twisted children and faces that belonged in no childhood nightmare. Long noses, sharp teeth, eyes that reflected the light they themselves produced. They moved in a way that was wrong, joints bending in directions joints shouldn't bend, and they were laughing. Laughing in a high, chittering chorus that didn't sound human because it wasn't, had never been, would never be. The thing wearing Brooke's face began to laugh too, and as it laughed, its shape began to change, to shrink, to twist into something closer to what the creatures in the trees truly were. Garrett ran. He ran without direction, without thought, crashing through forests that seemed to shift around him, trees appearing where there had been open ground, paths closing behind him as he passed. His radio was in his hand. He couldn't remember drawing it, and he was screaming into it, screaming for help, for backup, for anyone. "Unit 12, can you repeat? Need immediate. Peninsula. They're everywhere. Breaking up, Unit 12. The fog swallowed his words. The lights followed, always the same distance behind him, never closing, never falling back. They were playing with him. They'd been playing with Brooke for 3 days, and now they were playing with him too. His foot caught on a root. He went down hard, the radio spinning away into the fog, and when he pushed himself up, he found himself face to face with one of them. It was standing on a fallen log no more than 5 feet away, watching him with those terrible, reflective eyes. Up close, its skin had the texture of birch bark, its fingers ending in nails that looked like thorns. It tilted its head at an angle no human neck would allow and smiled with teeth like broken glass. "Walsh," it said. The voice was his father who had died in 2007. "Walsh, my boy, stay a while, stay with us." Garrett scrambled backward, found his feet, kept running. Behind him, dozens of voices called his name in voices he recognized. His father, his ex-wife, his childhood friend who'd drowned in Lake Superior at 17. The forest was full of the dead, and they were all inviting him to stay. The water appeared without warning. One moment he was running through trees. The next he was stumbling down a rocky slope toward the dark expanse of Kabetogama Lake. His boat was there. Somehow, impossibly, his boat was there, as if the lake had rearranged itself to offer him escape. He didn't question it. He threw himself aboard, started the engine, and opened the throttle before the boat had fully left the shore. Behind him, standing on the rocks, he saw them watching. Dozens of small figures, their lights extinguished now, their eyes still visible in the fog, reflecting the gray light of the dying day. One of them waved. A slow, patient wave, a wave that said they would see him again. The search teams found Brooke Hendrick's body the following spring after the ice melted. She was discovered at the bottom of a cliff on the peninsula's interior, a cliff that appeared on no maps, that none of the rangers had ever seen before. The official report listed the cause of death as fall from height, circumstances undetermined. There were no witnesses. There was no explanation for how she'd reached a location that shouldn't exist. Garrett Walsh completed his incident report with careful attention to procedure. Subject appeared disoriented. Subject fled deeper into wilderness before rescue could be effected. Subject's location was not recoverable before nightfall. He said nothing about the lights, nothing about the things in the trees, nothing about the clearing that he had searched for in 3 subsequent patrols and never found again. He requested a transfer to Joshua Tree the following month. Desert country, open sightlines. No lakes, no forests, no places where the in-between could gather and watch and wait. The request was approved. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind moves through the desert in a way that sounds almost like voices, Garrett hears his father calling his name. And sometimes in the corner of his vision he sees lights that flicker and move with purpose, lights that vanish when he turns to look directly at them. The Ojibwe have a word for the things that live in the boundary waters. The old stories warn travelers not to follow lights through the forest, not to trust voices calling from the fog, not to stray from marked paths no matter how lost they become. The stories say the little people hold grudges that span generations. They remember every trespass. They wait, and the lakes are patient. The lakes have always been patient. The lakes will wait for him to come back. Location: Olympic National Park, Washington. Date: October 8, 2009. The fog arrived with the dawn, rolling in from the Pacific like something alive, threading through the old-growth forest until the world beyond arm's reach ceased to exist. Brandon Webb stood on the porch of the Hoh Rainforest Ranger Station, watching the mist devour the parking lot one car at a time. His coffee had gone cold in his hands, but he hadn't noticed. 7 years in Olympic National Park, 5 of them stationed here in the Hoh, and he still found himself hypnotized by mornings like this, when the forest became a cathedral of gray and green, when sound traveled strangely and distances lost all meaning. The station radio crackled inside, followed by dispatch's voice. All units, weather advisory update, visibility under quarter-mile throughout the coastal lowlands. Rain expected by early afternoon, heavy at times. Trail conditions deteriorating. Brandon stepped inside and keyed the mic. Hoh station copies. What's the visitor count looking like? Light traffic. Most day hikers are staying put. You've got 1 overnight permit out. Tenant, Chloe, solo backpacker, departed yesterday for the 5 Mile Island camp. Due back by 1600 today. Copy that. I'll keep an eye out. He set down the mic and moved to his morning routine, the small rituals that structured each day in this remote corner of the park. Equipment check first. Flashlight batteries full, GPS unit charged, rain gear inspected for tears in the seams. His pack hung by the door, already loaded with the essentials: first aid kit, emergency blanket, water purification tablets, 50 feet of paracord, energy bars, signal mirror. He added a fresh set of batteries and 2 chemical light sticks, habits born from years of knowing how quickly the Hoh could turn hostile. The ranger station sat at the edge of the temperate rainforest, surrounded by Sitka spruce and western red cedar that had been growing since before Columbus landed. Some of these trees were over 300 feet tall, their canopy so dense that even on sunny days the forest floor existed in perpetual twilight. Moss covered everything: the trees, the rocks, the fallen logs. The very air itself seemed green with spores. In the fog, that green deepened to something almost black, and the usual sounds of the forest, the drip of condensation, the distant rush of the Hoh River, the calls of varied thrushes, became muffled, uncertain, as if heard through water. Brandon finished his coffee and pulled on his rain jacket. His first patrol would take him along the Hall of Mosses Trail, a short loop popular with tourists, before he headed deeper into the backcountry to check on the overnight campers. Standard procedure on a day like this. Nothing unusual about it. He paused at the door, looking out at the fog. Something felt different this morning, a tension in the air, a quality to the silence that prickled at the back of his neck. He'd learned to trust that feeling over the years. The Hoh had moods, and some of those moods demanded respect. An elder from the Quinault Nation had told him once, years ago when Brandon was still new to the park, that there were things in these forests older than the trees. The old people knew, the man had said, his eyes fixed on the tree line. They knew to stay on the paths, knew not to whistle after dark, knew that when the fog comes thick and the forest goes quiet, you don't go looking for what's looking at you. Brandon had smiled politely at the time, filed it away as local color, but he'd stopped whistling on night patrols, just in case. The Hall of Mosses Trail was empty, as expected. Brandon walked the loop slowly, checking for fallen branches, washouts, any hazards the overnight moisture might have created. The fog pressed close, reducing the massive trees to suggestions, their trunks fading into gray within 30 feet. His footsteps were the only sound, the soft compression of damp earth, the occasional squelch of standing water. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the undergrowth. Just the fog and the silence and the endless watching green. He was halfway through the loop when he heard the whistle. High and clear, a single note that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Brandon stopped listening. It could have been a bird, some species he didn't recognize perhaps, or a familiar call distorted by the fog. It could have been another hiker, though he'd seen no cars in the lot. It could have been nothing at all, a trick of air pressure and moisture. He waited. The whistle did not repeat. Brandon continued his patrol, but his pace had quickened without his conscious decision. The fog seemed thicker now, the trees closer. He found himself checking his bearings more frequently, confirming his position on the trail, even though he'd walked this path hundreds of times. By the time he returned to the station, the feeling of wrongness had settled into his bones like the damp. Chloe Tennant had chosen the Hoh for its solitude. After 6 months of 80-hour weeks at the Seattle law firm, of fluorescent lights and recycled air, and the constant hum of other people's demands, she needed silence. Real silence. The kind that existed only in places where cell phones didn't work, and the nearest human might be miles away. She'd done her research, downloaded the trail maps, checked the weather forecasts, registered her permit with the Park Service. 3 days, 2 nights, solo in the temperate rainforest. Her gear was top quality. She'd splurged on a 4-season tent, a sleeping bag rated to 15 degrees, a water filter that could handle glacial silt. Her father had taught her to camp when she was young, back before the divorce, back when weekends meant something other than billable hours. The first day had been perfect. Fog in the morning, burning off by noon to reveal cathedral shafts of light through the canopy. She'd made 5 Mile Island by early afternoon, set up camp on a gravel bar beside the Hoh River, spent the evening watching salmon struggle upstream to spawn and die. That night, she'd slept better than she had in months, lulled by the river's constant voice. The second morning brought the fog back, thicker than before. Chloe packed her gear and started back toward the trailhead, planning to take her time, maybe stop at the Mineral Creek campsite for lunch. The trail was easy to follow, well-maintained, clearly blazed, and she'd walked it just yesterday. No reason for concern. But the forest felt different today, heavier somehow, The fog pressed against her like something with weight, and the sounds she'd grown accustomed to, the river, the birds, the constant drip of moisture from the canopy, had faded to nothing. Just her own breathing and her own footsteps, impossibly loud in the silence. She'd been walking for an hour when she realized she hadn't passed the Mineral Creek Junction. Chloe stopped, pulled out her map. The junction should have been 20 minutes back, according to her pace. She'd been watching for the trail marker, the distinctive wooden sign she'd photographed on the way in. She couldn't have missed it, but she had. Somehow she had. She turned around, retracing her steps. The fog made everything look the same. The same trees, the same moss, the same gray-green emptiness extending in every direction. She walked for 15 minutes, 20, 30. No junction, no trail marker. Just the path stretching ahead of her, curving through the forest toward a destination that kept receding. "Okay," she said aloud, and her voice sounded strange, flat, absorbed by the fog. "Okay, you missed a turn. It happens. Just keep going. You'll hit the trailhead eventually." She turned back toward the direction she thought was correct and started walking again. Her heart had begun to beat faster, though she told herself it was just exertion, just the weight of her pack, just the dampness making her clammy. 30 minutes later, she passed the same fallen log for the third time. She was certain it was the same one, a massive cedar, its root ball torn from the earth, moss growing thick on its decomposing trunk. She'd noted it the first time because of its size, the second time because of a growing unease. The third time she stopped and stared at it, her hands beginning to shake. She was walking in circles, on a straight trail, in a forest she'd navigated successfully just yesterday. "Hello?" she called out. "Is anyone there?" Her voice fell dead in the fog. No echo, no response, just the silence pressing in, thick and wet and wrong. And then, from somewhere deeper in the forest, she heard a whistle, high and clear, almost playful, like someone trying to get her attention. Brandon reached the 5 Mile Island campsite by noon, his rain jacket already dark with moisture despite the fact that it hadn't started raining yet. The fog had only thickened as he moved deeper into the backcountry, reducing visibility to perhaps 20 feet. The forest around him was a world of shapes and shadows, trees appearing and disappearing like ghosts as he walked. The campsite was empty. Chloe Tennant's tent, her gear, the fire ring she would have used, nothing. The gravel bar showed no sign of recent occupation, though the fog and moisture could have erased tracks quickly. Brandon checked the bear box, found it empty and latched. Checked the area for any sign of disturbance, found none. She should have been here. According to her permit, she'd planned to spend the second night at 5 Mile Island before hiking out. But there was no evidence she'd ever arrived. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Ho Station. I'm at 5 Mile Island. The campsite is empty. No sign of the overnight permit. Tenant, Chloe, requesting confirmation on her check-in status." Static answered him, longer than usual. Then fragmented. "Ho, copy. No check-in logged. Repeat. No. Dispatch, you're breaking up. Say again? Missing. Possible search and rescue. Advise." The radio crackled and went silent. Brandon checked the battery. Full. Checked the channel. Correct. Checked the antenna. Intact. Everything was working, but the connection had dissolved into static and half words. He tried again. "Dispatch, do you copy?" Nothing. Then, very faintly, a voice that might have been dispatch or might have been something else entirely. "Don't whistle." Brandon stared at the radio in his hand. He knew what he'd heard, knew it was impossible, a coincidence of static and expectation, his mind finding patterns in noise. But his hand was trembling as he clipped the radio back to his belt. He began to hike back toward the trailhead, moving faster now. The fog seemed to follow him, always the same density, never thinning despite the hours passing. He should have been able to see further by now. The afternoon should have burned off some of this moisture, but the gray pressed close and the forest remained silent, and somewhere in the distance, always the same distance no matter how far he walked, He could hear something moving through the undergrowth. Not an animal. Animals made noise, broke branches, disturbed leaves, breathed audibly when they ran. This sound was different. Footsteps that didn't quite match a human gait, moving parallel to the trail, keeping pace with him. When he stopped, the sound stopped. When he moved, it moved, always just beyond the edge of visibility, always watching. He tried the radio again. "Dispatch, this is Brandon Webb, host station. I've got possible overdue hiker and something's..." He stopped. Something's what? Following me? Making sounds in the fog? He couldn't say that. "I'm returning to the trailhead. Request backup for a search operation." The radio answered with static, but underneath the static, he heard something else. A voice, but not dispatch's voice. A woman's voice, young and frightened. "Please help me, I'm lost. Please, I can hear you. Can you hear me?" Brandon's blood went cold. The radio frequency was Park Service only. No civilian equipment could access it. But the voice continued, pleading and desperate. "I don't know where I am. The fog. I can't see anything. Please, I've been walking for hours." "This is Park Service," Brandon said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Identify yourself. What is your location?" The voice laughed. It was the wrong laugh. Too high, too long. The sound of something that had learned laughter from listening to humans but didn't understand what it meant. "I'm right here," the voice said. "I'm right behind you." Brandon spun around. The trail behind him was empty, just fog and trees and the endless dripping silence. But the moss on the nearest cedar was disturbed, scraped away in long, parallel grooves, as if something with claws had pressed against it. The marks were fresh, the exposed wood still oozing sap. They hadn't been there a moment ago. He was certain of that. He ran. Chloe had stopped trying to find the trail. There was no trail anymore. Or rather, there were too many trails. Paths that appeared and disappeared, that looped back on themselves, that led deeper into the fog no matter which direction she chose. She'd been walking for hours, and the light had barely changed. It should be afternoon by now. It should be raining, but the fog remained. Unchanged, eternal. And the forest had become a maze with walls that moved when she wasn't looking. The whistle came again, closer this time. She'd heard it a dozen times now, always from a different direction, always with that same playful quality. Like a game, like something was toying with her. "What do you want?" she screamed into the fog. "Who's there?" A shape moved at the edge of her vision. She turned toward it, saw nothing but trees and mist, turned back, and there it was again. Something tall and thin standing between two cedars watching her. She couldn't make out features, couldn't tell if it was human or animal or something else entirely. Just a shape, darker than the fog around it, utterly motionless. "Please," she whispered. "Please, I just want to go home." The shape moved, not toward her, sideways, gliding between the trees with a fluidity that human bodies didn't possess, and as it moved she heard the whistle again, and she understood with terrible clarity that the sound was coming from the shape, that it had been coming from the shape all along. She ran. The forest blurred around her, branches tearing at her jacket, her pack, her face. She ran until her lungs burned and her legs gave out, and then she crawled, and then she simply lay on the forest floor, the moss pressing cold and wet against her cheek, and waited for whatever came next. The whistle sounded directly above her. She looked up. The shape was there, standing over her so close she could have touched it. In the fog it was impossible to see clearly, but she could make out suggestions, limbs too long, joints that bent the wrong way, a face that was almost human but wrong in proportions, features that slid and shifted like smoke. "Please," she said one more time. It reached down. Its touch was cold, not the cold of the grave, but the cold of deep water, of caves that had never seen sunlight, of places where human beings were never meant to go. And then Chloe Tennant was gone, and only the fog remained. Brandon found her pack at the edge of the Hoh River, 3 miles from any established trail. It was sitting upright, perfectly arranged, as if someone had set it down carefully and walked away. Her water bottle was full. Her food was untouched. Her emergency beacon, the one that should have been activated if she was in trouble, was still in its case, never deployed. He didn't touch anything. He marked the GPS coordinates with shaking hands and backed away slowly, never turning his back on the tree line. The fog had begun to thin by then, and through the gaps he could see something moving in the forest. Not one shape now. Several, standing among the cedars at irregular intervals, watching him. Waiting. He counted 5, 6, 7 of them before he forced himself to stop looking. His radio crackled. "Ho, station. This is dispatch. We lost you for about 4 hours. What's your status?" 4 hours. He checked his watch. The display confirmed it. He'd been in the backcountry for nearly 8 hours, though it felt like 2. 8 hours in the fog with those things watching him, and they'd let him go. Why had they let him go? "I found the missing hiker's gear," he said into the radio, his voice mechanical, distant. No sign of the subject. Requesting search and rescue team, grid search of the area. "Copy that, Ho station. Say our team en route. Return to trailhead for debriefing." He walked back to the ranger station as the fog finally lifted, revealing a forest that looked exactly as it always had. Beautiful, ancient, indifferent. The varied thrushes were singing again. A deer crossed the trail ahead of him, pausing to watch him pass before disappearing into the undergrowth. Normal. Everything was normal. Except for the shapes he could still see at the edge of his vision, standing among the trees, and the whistle he could still hear, faint and playful as if inviting him to follow. They never found Chloe Tennant. The search lasted 9 days, covered over 50 square miles of backcountry, involved 3 agencies and 24 personnel. They found her car in the parking lot. They found her registration at the permit office. They found her packed by the river, her gear undisturbed, her emergency beacon never activated. But of Chloe herself, her body, her remains, any trace of her final hours, there was nothing. The official report listed her as a missing person, circumstances unknown. The case remained open but inactive, another file in a drawer of files that would never be solved. Brandon Webb submitted his incident report with the minimum required detail. Lost radio contact due to atmospheric conditions. Located subject's gear at river's edge. No sign of subject. He did not mention the shapes in the fog. He did not mention the whistle that had followed him for miles. He did not mention the voice on the radio that had laughed in a way that human beings do not laugh. He requested a transfer 2 weeks later. The Knoll elder had been right. There were things in these forests older than the trees, and they did not appreciate being seen. The transfer was approved. Arizona, a desert park, somewhere without fog and old growth and the endless dripping silence. On his last night at the Ho station, Brandon sat on the porch and watched the fog roll in from the Pacific. He could see shapes in it, moving among the trees at the edge of the parking lot. 5 of them. 6. 7. Standing motionless, watching the station, watching him. One of them whistled. Brandon went inside, locked the door, and did not come out until morning. He drove away at first light, and he did not look back, and he never spoke of what happened in the Ho rainforest on October 8, 2009. But sometimes late at night, in a desert cabin 1,000 miles from the nearest old-growth forest, he wakes to the sound of whistling outside his window. And when he looks, there is nothing there. Just the empty night and the stars and the wind moving through the sagebrush. Just the wind. He is almost certain it is just the wind. Location: Congaree National Park, South Carolina. Date: August 23, 2009. The humidity hit Derek like a wall when he stepped out of the ranger station at 6 in the morning. August in the South Carolina Lowcountry was its own particular kind of misery. The air so thick with moisture it felt like breathing through wet cloth. The temperature already climbing toward 90 before the sun had fully cleared the tree line. He'd been working Congaree for 4 years now, long enough to have made peace with the sweat that would soak through his uniform by noon, the mosquitoes that treated DEET as seasoning, the way the bottomland forest seemed to swallow sound and light in equal measure. He loved this place in the way you love something that regularly tries to kill you, with respect, wariness, and a bone-deep appreciation for its indifferent beauty. The station's weather radio had been chattering about storms all morning. Tropical moisture pushing up from the Gulf, the forecaster said, colliding with a stalled front somewhere over Georgia. They were looking at heavy thunderstorms by late afternoon, possibly severe. Flash flood warnings for the low-lying areas, which in Congaree meant most of the park. Derek filled his water bottles, checked his radio batteries, and pulled up the day's schedule on the ancient desktop computer that served as their dispatch system. Light day, a few permits to check in the backcountry camping areas, routine patrol of the boardwalk system, maybe a sweep of the Kingsnake Trail if time allowed. He poured himself coffee from the pot that had been brewing since 5, the liquid dark and bitter enough to strip paint. Through the station window, he could see the cypress trees rising from the floodplain like cathedral columns, their swollen bases disappearing into the black water that gave the park its character. Congaree was one of the largest intact expanses of old-growth bottomland hardwood forest left in the southeastern United States. Champion trees, some of them, loblolly pines and bald cypresses that had been growing when the Revolutionary War was being fought. The place had a presence, a weight of years that Derek felt every time he walked beneath those ancient canopies. The forest remembered things. That's what old Clement, the maintenance worker who'd been here since the park's establishment in 1976, always said. The forest remembers, and sometimes it talks back. Derek had dismissed that as local color, the kind of spooky folklore that accumulated around any wild place. But there were days, humid, still days like this one, when the air pressed down and the usual sounds of the swamp went quiet, when he almost believed it. His morning patrol took him along the elevated boardwalk that wound through the heart of the floodplain, a 2.5-mile loop that showcased the park's most impressive trees. Even this early, he encountered a few visitors. A retired couple from Ohio photographing the massive loblolly pine near the Weston Lake overlook, a solo birder with impressive binoculars scanning the canopy for prothonotary warblers. Derek checked permits, answered questions about the best spots to see wildlife, warned everyone about the incoming storms. Standard morning, standard duties. The swamp hummed with its usual chorus of insects and frogs, the distant territorial drumming of a pileated woodpecker echoing through the trees. It was near the end of his boardwalk loop, at the junction where the Sims Trail split off toward the backcountry, that Derek noticed the first wrong thing. A backpack sat at the base of a water tupelo, just off the edge of the boardwalk where a set of wooden steps descended into the floodplain. Women's pack, purple and gray with a hydration bladder tube hanging loose. No sign of its owner. Derek checked the immediate area, calling out a generic, "Hello, Park Service," that echoed flatly in the humid air. No response. He photographed the pack, noted the GPS coordinates, and keyed his radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 3. I've got an abandoned pack at the Sims Trail Junction, approximately 2.3 miles from the visitor center. No sign of the owner. Can you check if we have any overdue permits or missing person reports?" The radio crackled. "Copy, Unit 3. Checking now. Stand by." Derek waited, studying the pack without touching it. The main compartment was partially unzipped, revealing a water bottle, a trail map, and what looked like a camera case. Whoever owned this had set it down deliberately or dropped it in a hurry. Neither option was particularly reassuring. Unit 3, dispatch. We've got a visitor who signed in at the Kingsnake Trailhead yesterday evening. Female, late 20s, name is Scarlett Webb. Listed a solo overnight at Bluff Camp. She was due to check out by 10 this morning. No checkout recorded. Derek checked his watch. 8:45. Still early, technically. But that pack didn't look like it belonged to someone who was casually running late. Copy, dispatch. I'm going to head down Sims Trail toward Bluff Camp. See if I can locate her. Understood, Unit 3. Be advised, weather's moving faster than predicted. You've got maybe 3 hours before conditions deteriorate. Check in every 30 minutes. Will do. Unit 3 out. Scarlett had known she was being watched since the previous afternoon. It started as a feeling, that prickling sensation at the back of the neck, the primitive awareness that something was paying attention. She'd been hiking the Oak Ridge Trail about a mile from the campsite she'd reserved when the feeling first hit her. She'd stopped, turned slowly in a complete circle, scanning the undergrowth for any sign of movement. Nothing. Just trees, ferns, the black water pooling in the low spots. Probably an alligator, she'd told herself. They were common in the park, the ranger at the visitor center had said. Shy, mostly. Nothing to worry about unless you got too close. But alligators didn't make you feel watched. Alligators didn't raise the hair on your arms from 50 feet away. She'd made camp at Bluff Camp as planned, set up her tent on the elevated platform that kept her above the soggy ground, made dinner, watched the sunset paint the cypress trees gold and amber, tried to shake the uneasy feeling that had followed her all afternoon. The forest went quiet as darkness fell. Not silent exactly, but muted. The daytime chorus of birds replaced by the deeper rhythms of frogs and insects. Scarlett had camped alone dozens of times. She knew the sounds of the night, the natural soundtrack of wilderness. This was different. The quiet felt deliberate, as if the swamp itself were holding its breath. She'd heard the footsteps around midnight, not animal footsteps. Something walking on two legs, circling her campsite at a distance of maybe 30 yards. Slow, unhurried, crackling through the underbrush with a rhythm that was almost human. Almost. Something about the gait was wrong, the intervals between steps not quite matching any natural stride. Scarlett had lain frozen in her sleeping bag, flashlight gripped in white-knuckled hands, listening as whatever it was completed one full circuit of her camp, then another, then a third, and then it had stopped. Just stopped. No retreating footsteps, no sound of something moving away. One moment the footsteps were there, the next they weren't, as if the thing had simply ceased to exist. Scarlett hadn't slept. She'd lain awake until dawn bled gray through the trees, and the moment there was enough light to see, she'd packed her gear and started back toward the trailhead. Screw the permit checkout time. Screw the rest of her planned hike. She was getting out of this swamp and she was never coming back. She'd made it about 2 miles when she heard the voice. Scarlett? She stopped dead. The voice had come from somewhere to her right, deeper in the forest, away from the trail. It sounded like her mother. Exactly like her mother. The particular cadence, the slight southern lilt that 30 years in Charlotte hadn't erased. But her mother was in Charlotte. Her mother was 200 miles away. Her mother didn't know exactly where Scarlett was hiking, just that swamp park in her vague description. "Hello?" Scarlett called, her voice thin against the heavy air. "Scarlett, honey, I've been looking for you." Her mother's voice. Her mother's exact voice. But her mother never called her honey. It was always sweetheart or baby girl, the endearments she'd used since Scarlett was small. Something cold moved through Scarlett's chest despite the oppressive heat. She started walking again, faster now, not quite running but close. The trail wound through a section of particularly dense undergrowth, the trees pressing in close, their canopy blocking most of the morning light. In the shadows between the trunks, something moved. She saw it for only a second. A shape, tall and hunched, with proportions that didn't make sense. Too long in the limbs, too narrow in the torso. It was there, watching from behind a massive cypress, and then it was gone, slipping into the darkness between the trees with a fluid grace that no human body could achieve. Scarlett ran. Derek found the first sign of Scarlett Webb half a mile down the Sims Trail. A single hiking boot, women's size, lying in the middle of the path. The laces were still tied. He photographed it, marked the location, and pressed on, his unease growing with every step. The swamp around him had gone quiet in that particular way he'd learned to distrust. The normal sounds of wildlife replaced by a dense, expectant silence. Even the insects had stopped their buzzing, as if the entire forest were listening for something. The trail descended into a section of the floodplain where the water level was higher than usual, the black water reaching almost to the edge of the wooden walkway that kept hikers out of the muck. Derek moved carefully. scanning the underbrush on either side, looking for any sign of the missing woman. The humidity was brutal now, the air so saturated that his clothes clung to his skin, and every breath felt like drowning in slow motion. Dispatch Unit 3. I'm approximately 1 mile down Sims Trail, approaching the low water crossing. Found evidence of the missing hiker, 1 boot, abandoned on trail. No sign of the victim. Requesting backup. Static answered him. Then faintly, 3. Copy. Breaking. Dispatch, say again? You're breaking up. Nothing. Just the hiss of dead air, and beneath it, something else. A sound like breathing, deep and slow, coming from the radio itself. Derek checked the channel, checked the battery. Everything was working. Everything should be working. He turned the radio off and kept moving. The low water crossing was a section of trail where the boardwalk gave way to a series of stepping stones, large flat rocks placed to allow passage during normal water levels. Today, with the floodplain swollen from recent rains, the stones were barely visible beneath the black water. Derek tested each one before committing his weight, moving slowly, watching for the subtle V-shaped wake that would indicate an alligator. He was halfway across when he saw the body. Not a body, a person. Someone lying face down on the opposite bank, half hidden in the undergrowth, their clothes torn and mud-caked. "Park Service," Derek shouted, abandoning caution to splash through the remaining distance. "Can you hear me?" No response. He reached the bank, pushed through the dense ferns, and stopped. It wasn't Scarlet Webb. It couldn't be. The clothing was wrong. The body shape was wrong. This was a man, middle-aged, wearing the tattered remains of what might have been a suit. The fabric was rotted, falling apart at the seams, and the body beneath it. Derek's mind refused to process what he was seeing. The proportions were wrong, the limbs bent at angles that no human skeleton could achieve. And the face was looking at him, eyes open, pale and clouded, but tracking his movement with terrible awareness. Derek stumbled backward, his foot slipping on the muddy bank. The thing on the ground twitched, its movements jerky and disconnected like a puppet with tangled strings. It opened its mouth, and what came out was Scarlett's voice. Scarlett's exact voice, as clear and natural as if she were standing right beside him. "Help me, please, I'm so scared, help me." Derek ran. He ran without direction, crashing through the undergrowth, branches whipping his face and arms. The trail was gone, lost somewhere behind him in his panic. The forest pressed in from all sides, the ancient trees leaning close, their massive trunks forming walls that channeled his flight in directions he couldn't control. Behind him, he could hear something following. Not footsteps, something else. A wet sliding sound, like something large pulling itself through the mud. And voices. So many voices. Derek. That was his mother, dead these 8 years. "Derek, honey, wait for me." "Unit 3, this is dispatch." His colleague Maria's voice, but wrong somehow. The rhythm off, the pauses in strange places. "Derek, where are you? We're coming to help. Just stay where you are." "Please." Scarlet again, closer now, somewhere to his left. "Please, I'm right here, I'm so close. Just look at me, just turn around and look." Derek didn't turn around. Some instinct, some ancient survival mechanism buried deep in his brainstem told him that looking would be a mistake. That whatever was behind him needed to be seen to fully exist, and as long as he didn't look, as long as he kept moving, he might survive. He burst out of the trees into a clearing he didn't recognize. The ground here was dry, elevated above the flood level, carpeted with dead leaves and dominated by a single massive cypress that had to be centuries old. Its trunk was easily 15 feet in diameter, its bark deeply furrowed, its branches spreading overhead like the vaulted ceiling of a cathedral. At its base, arranged in a rough circle, were bones. Not animal bones. Human bones. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, piled and scattered and partially sunken into the leaf litter. Skulls grinned up at the canopy. Femurs lay crossed like offerings, and there, sitting with her back against the great tree, was Scarlet Webb, alive, eyes open, looking at him with an expression of desperate, wordless terror. Derek took a step toward her, and she shook her head violently, her mouth moving but no sound coming out. Her hands were pressed flat against the tree trunk behind her, her fingers digging into the bark, and Derek realized with horror that she wasn't sitting against the tree by choice. Something was holding her there, something he couldn't see. "Scarlet," he said, his voice cracking. "Scarlet, can you hear me?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm going to get you out of here. I'm going to run." The word was barely a whisper, forced out through lips that seemed reluctant to move. "It's behind you. It's been behind you the whole time. Run." Derek felt it then, the presence at his back, the weight of something's attention pressing down on him like a physical force. The air temperature dropped, impossibly, 20 degrees in an instant. The swamp smell intensified, becoming something older, ranker, the reek of ancient rot and patient hunger. He didn't turn around. "Why isn't it taking me?" he whispered. Scarlet's eyes moved, focusing on something over his shoulder, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "It already did," she said. "Last night, in my tent. What you're looking at..." Her voice broke. "What you're looking at isn't me anymore. It just remembers being me. It just wears what it took." Derek watched as the thing that looked like Scarlet smiled, and the smile was wrong. Too wide, too many teeth, stretching the familiar face into something that had never been human. "Run," it said, in a voice that was no longer Scarlet's at all. "I'll give you a head start, I always do. It's more fun when they run." Derek ran. He ran until his lungs burned, until his legs gave out, until he collapsed in a drainage ditch somewhere he didn't recognize. The storm had arrived while he wasn't paying attention, rain hammering down through the canopy, thunder rolling across the sky like artillery fire. He lay in the mud and the water, and he couldn't stop shaking. They found him 3 hours later, when the search team finally tracked his GPS beacon. He was hypothermic despite the August heat, non-responsive, his eyes fixed on something only he could see. The paramedics had to sedate him to get him into the ambulance. Scarlet Webb was never found. The search lasted 2 weeks, covered every inch of the park, brought in dogs and helicopters and volunteers from 3 counties. They found her other boot, her torn backpack, her camera with its memory card corrupted beyond recovery. They found strange tracks in the mud near the low-water crossing, tracks that the wildlife experts couldn't identify, tracks that seemed to change direction impossibly, as if whatever made them had been walking backward. They found the clearing with the massive cypress, but there were no bones. Just dead leaves and an old tree and the lingering smell of something rotten. Derek resigned from the Park Service 6 months later. He doesn't talk about what happened that day in Congaree. Not to the investigators, not to the therapist they made him see, not to anyone. But sometimes, late at night when sleep won't come, he hears voices outside his apartment window. Voices he recognizes. His mother, his colleagues, Scarlet Webb, calling his name with that particular inflection, asking him to come outside, promising that everything will be okay if he just opens the door. He moved to Phoenix 3 years ago. Deserts don't have swamps. Deserts don't have bottomland forests with ancient trees and black water and things that remember. But sometimes when the monsoon rains come and the air turns humid and the desert washes flood with unexpected water, Derek could swear he smells it. That old rot, that patient hunger, drifting on the wind from somewhere far away. Waiting, remembering. The forest always remembers. Location: Congaree National Park, South Carolina. Date: August 19, 2007. The rain had been falling for 3 days when Andrew Harmon woke to the sound of it drumming against the roof of the Congaree Ranger Station. He lay still for a moment in the gray pre-dawn light, listening to the rhythm of water on wood and tin, the steady percussion that had become the soundtrack of the week. Tropical storm Erin had stalled over the Carolina Lowcountry, and the park had transformed into something primordial, something that predated human memory. Andrew rose at 5:30, as he had every morning for the past 6 years. The ritual was ingrained. Coffee first, black and strong, brewed in the ancient percolator that had outlasted 3 district rangers and would probably outlast him. Then the morning weather check, pulling data from the No AA feed on the station computer. The numbers confirmed what his joints already knew. Another 4 to 6 inches expected before midnight. Flood warnings extended through Wednesday. Barometric pressure dropping. The swamp was gorging itself on water, the Congaree River spilling over its banks into the bottomland forest, turning trails into creeks and creeks into rivers. He dressed in his rain gear and stepped onto the station porch, coffee steaming in one hand, radio in the other. The world beyond the clearing was a wall of gray-green, the ancient bald cypresses rising from water that had no business being there. Spanish moss hung from every branch like the beards of drowned men, dripping, swaying in the warm wind that carried the smell of rot and growing things, of life and death intertwined in the way only a swamp can manage. Somewhere in the canopy, a barred owl called its distinctive "Who cooks for you all," the sound muffled by the rain, but unmistakable. Andrew had heard that call 10,000 times. It was the voice of Congaree itself. The morning radio check with the Columbia Dispatch came through clear despite the weather. Unit 14, this is dispatch. Status check over. Dispatch, Unit 14, all quiet at Harry Hampton. Water's up another 8 inches since yesterday. Boardwalks partially submerged at the low points. I'm posting closure signs on the Weston Lake Loop and Kingsnake Trail this morning. Over. Copy that, Unit 14. Be advised we have an overdue hiker reported. Natalie Vance, age 28, entered the park Thursday afternoon for a day hike. Vehicle still in the lot as of last night's patrol. Over. Andrew set down his coffee. Thursday afternoon. 3 days ago. 3 days in the swamp with the water rising. Copy dispatch. Description and last known location? White female, 5'6", brown hair. Signed in for the Oak Ridge Trail. Emergency contact reported her overdue Saturday evening. Over. Understood. I'll start at Oak Ridge and work outward. Requesting backup if available. Over. Negative on backup, Unit 14. All personnel committed to flood response in the eastern sectors. You're solo until further notice. Check in every 2 hours. Over. Copy. Unit 14 out. Andrew finished his coffee without tasting it. 3 days. In summer, with the heat and humidity, dehydration could kill in 24 hours if someone wasn't careful. With the flooding, the dangers multiplied. Cottonmouths driven from their dens, currents strong enough to sweep a person off their feet, sinkholes hidden beneath the murky water. And that was assuming she'd simply gotten lost. He gathered his search kit with the efficiency of long practice. GPS unit, topographic maps sealed in waterproof cases, first aid supplies, emergency blanket, water purification tablets, extra batteries, flares. He checked his radio twice, tested the emergency beacon, and headed for the parking area where the missing woman's car would be waiting. The lot was nearly empty. The park had been effectively closed since the storm arrived, with only the most determined visitors attempting the flooded trails. The Honda Civic sat alone near the trailhead, its windshield plastered with wet leaves. 3 days of rain pooled on its roof. Andrew circled the vehicle slowly. The doors were locked. Through the driver's window, he could see a day pack on the passenger seat, a water bottle in the cup holder, a folded map that she apparently hadn't taken with her. On the dashboard, a parking permit dated August 16th. He tried the Oak Ridge trailhead first, following the boardwalk as far as he could before the water swallowed it entirely. The flood had risen nearly 2 feet above the wooden planks, turning the trail into a black river that reflected the gray sky and fragments between the cypress knees. Andrew waded in carefully, testing each step, feeling for the submerged boards beneath his boots. The water was warm as blood, thick with tannins that stained everything they touched. He called her name into the dripping silence. "Natalie Vance, National Park Service, can you hear me?" The swamp absorbed his voice and offered nothing in return. Natalie had known, by the second day, that she was being followed. It had started small, a feeling at the back of her neck, a prickle of awareness that made her turn and find nothing but trees and water, and the endless green twilight of the forest. She'd told herself it was paranoia, the natural unease of being alone in an unfamiliar place. She was an experienced hiker. She'd done the Appalachian Trail in sections, spent weeks in the Smokies, camped alone in places far more remote than a park 20 miles from Columbia. She didn't scare easily. But by Friday morning, after spending the night huddled on a fallen log that kept her just above the rising water, Natalie had started to understand that something was wrong in a way that couldn't be rationalized. The wrongness was in the sounds, or rather, the absence of them. The swamp should have been alive with noise: frogs, insects, birds, the splash of fish and the rustle of small animals in the undergrowth. But whenever the feeling came, whenever she felt those eyes on her back, everything went quiet. Not gradually, the way animals fall silent when a predator passes. This was instantaneous. One moment the chorus was there, and the next it was gone, replaced by a silence so complete it seemed to have texture, weight, presence. The first time she saw it, she'd almost convinced herself it was another hiker. She'd been trying to find her way back to the main trail, following what she thought was the boardwalk's route beneath the floodwater, when she spotted movement between the trees, a figure maybe 50 yards away standing in water up to its thighs. Human-shaped, wearing what looked like dark clothing. Natalie had called out, relief flooding through her. Another person meant rescue, meant help, meant she wasn't alone anymore. The figure hadn't answered. It had simply stood there, watching her, and even at that distance, Natalie could feel the weight of its attention like a physical pressure against her skin. "Hello? I'm lost. Can you help me?" The figure tilted its head. The motion was wrong. Too far. Too slow. Like a dog hearing a strange sound, but more extreme. The neck bending at an angle that made Natalie's stomach clench with sudden, primal revulsion. She'd backed away. Slowly at first, then faster. Not quite running, but moving as quickly as the water would allow. When she'd looked back, the figure was gone. That was Friday. By Saturday, she'd seen it 3 more times. Always at a distance. Always watching. Always disappearing when she looked away and looked back. And each time she'd noticed details that shouldn't have been possible. The figure seemed taller now than it had the first time. Its proportions had changed. Arms too long, shoulders too broad. The silhouette subtly wrong in ways she couldn't articulate. And the last time, just before sunset, she could have sworn she'd seen its eyes. They had reflected the dying light. Yellow, bright as lanterns in the deepening gloom. That night, she didn't sleep. She found the highest ground she could, a small rise where an ancient cypress had fallen and created a tangle of roots and earth above the floodline, and she waited in the dark, listening to the rain, listening for footsteps in the water below. She heard them, slow, patient, circling her refuge in a wide arc that never came close enough to see, never strayed far enough to ignore. Something was hunting her, and it was taking its time. Andrew had searched for 3 hours when he found the first sign. It was a shoe, wedged between 2 cypress knees at the edge of what had been the Sims Trail before the flood swallowed it. A woman's hiking boot, size 7 or 8, caked with mud. No blood, no obvious damage, just a shoe that someone had lost or abandoned in their flight through the swamp. He keyed his radio. "Dispatch Unit 14, I've got personal effects. One hiking boot, appears to match our missing hiker. Location is approximately half a mile northeast of the Sims Trail junction. I'm continuing the search. Over." "Copy, Unit 14. Any sign of the subject?" "Negative. Water's too high for tracks. I'm going to push deeper. Over." "Understood. Be advised. Weather Service is upgrading their warning. Another cell moving in. Visibility dropping. Recommend you return to station within 2 hours. Over." "Copy. I'll reassess at 1400. Unit 14 out." Andrew pocketed the boot and continued. The water was above his knees now, the current stronger than it had any right to be this far from the river. The forest here was old in a way that most people never experienced. These trees had been standing when Columbus landed, when the first English ships arrived at Jamestown. The bottomland hardwood forest of Congaree was one of the last truly primeval places in the eastern United States, and in the gray stormlight, with the water rising and the Spanish moss dripping from branches that blocked out the sky, it felt like stepping backward in time, like entering a world where humans had never been welcome. He noticed the silence first. It arrived without warning, between one step and the next. The rain was still falling, but somehow even that sound seemed muted now, dampened as if the air itself had grown thick enough to absorb it. No birds, no insects, no frogs, just Andrew's own breathing and the soft splash of his steps through the warm black water. He stopped, listened. His hand moved to the radio on his shoulder, but he didn't key it yet. He'd worked swamps for years, in Florida and Louisiana, before coming to Congaree. He knew the sounds of the wetlands the way he knew his own heartbeat. And this absence was wrong. "Hello? Natalie?" His voice died in the air. The trees seemed to lean in, listening, and somewhere in the back of his mind, in the part of him that predated civilization and remembered what it meant to be prey, something began to scream that he needed to leave. Now, without looking back. Andrew was too professional to run from a feeling. He'd been trained to trust evidence, not instinct, and so he kept walking, pushing deeper into the silence, into the flooded forest where the ancient cypresses rose like pillars in a drowned cathedral. He didn't see the figure until he was almost on top of it. It was standing in the water perhaps 30 feet ahead, half hidden behind the massive trunk of a loblolly pine. Andrew's first thought was relief. He'd found her, the missing hiker, alive and waiting to be rescued. He opened his mouth to call out. Then the figure moved and Andrew's voice died in his throat. It stepped out from behind the tree with a motion that was wrong in every way. Too fluid, too graceful. The joints bending in directions that human joints didn't bend. It was shaped like a person, almost. The proportions were close enough to fool the eye at a distance, but this close the wrongness was undeniable. The limbs were too long, the torso too narrow. And the face. Andrew couldn't make out the face. It was wrong the way a reflection in moving water is wrong. Features that shifted and blurred refused to resolve into anything recognizable. But the eyes he could see clearly. They caught what little light filtered through the canopy and threw it back, yellow and bright, the eyes of something that hunted in the dark. His radio crackled to life. The sound was so unexpected in the silence that Andrew jumped, his hand flying to his chest. "NIT 14 copy." The voice was fragmented, broken by interference that shouldn't have existed this close to the station, but it was enough to break the spell. Andrew backed away slowly, his eyes fixed on the thing standing in the water, watching him with those impossible yellow eyes. "Unit 14 to dispatch, I have a situation. There's someone." His words caught. What could he say? What possible report could explain what he was seeing? "I need backup. My location is 1.2 miles northeast of Sims Junction. I'm returning to the station." Over. Static. Then, through the crackle, a voice that wasn't dispatch. A woman's voice. Natalie Vance's voice, maybe, if Natalie Vance had somehow learned to speak through the radio without a transmitter. "Andrew, come find me. I'm right here. I've been waiting." The thing in the water smiled. The expression was wrong. Too wide, too many teeth. A grotesque parody of human expression stretched across a face that had never been human. And it took a step toward him. Andrew ran. Natalie heard him coming. She'd been on her perch in the fallen cypress for nearly 24 hours, watching the water below, watching for the thing that circled and waited and never quite attacked. She was dehydrated, exhausted, her thoughts growing fuzzy at the edges. But she heard the splashing, the crash of someone moving fast through the swamp, and she felt hope kindle in her chest for the first time since Thursday. "Here!" she screamed, her voice cracked and raw. "I'm up here. Please." The splashing stopped. Silence fell, that horrible pregnant silence that had become the signature of the thing hunting her. Natalie held her breath, peering down through the tangle of roots and branches, trying to see who, or what, was below. A man emerged from between the trees. Uniformed, a park ranger. He was looking around wildly, his radio clutched in one hand, his face pale with what Natalie recognized immediately as fear. Real fear, the kind she'd been living with for 3 days. "Up here," she called again. "I'm in the tree." He looked up, their eyes met, and in that moment, Natalie felt something she hadn't felt since the nightmare began. The possibility of survival. Then she saw movement behind him, a shape rising from the water, and she understood with a clarity that crushed the hope as quickly as it had bloomed, that the thing had been waiting for exactly this moment. It had let her survive. It had let her call out. Because it wanted the ranger to come, because it wanted them both. "Behind you!" she screamed. "Oh God, it's right behind you." The ranger spun. Natalie saw his face change, saw the color drain from it as he registered what was standing there, less than 10 feet away now, its shape finally resolving into something that couldn't be denied. It was tall, 8 feet, maybe more, its body gaunt and wrong, covered in something that might have been fur or might have been hanging moss or might have been something else entirely. Its arms ended in hands with too many joints, fingers that curved like hooks. And its face. Its face was almost human now, features that shifted and changed like smoke, cycling through expressions, smiling, snarling, weeping, as if trying to remember what faces were supposed to do. "Run," the ranger said. His voice was steady, impossibly steady. "When I move, you run. Don't look back. I can't the water. You can. Go toward the sun, east. You'll hit the boardwalk. Don't stop until you reach the parking lot." The thing lunged. Andrew didn't remember drawing his service weapon. One moment his hands were empty. The next the pistol was in his grip, barking 3 times in rapid succession. The shots struck the creature. He saw them impact, saw the dark spray where the bullets hit, but it didn't slow, didn't fall, didn't even flinch. He fired twice more. The creature's hand caught him across the chest and he was airborne, spinning, crashing into the flooded water with enough force to drive the breath from his lungs. His radio was gone. His weapon was gone. There was nothing but warm black water filling his mouth and the desperate need to surface, to breathe, to live. He found his feet somehow, broke the surface gasping. The creature was standing where he'd been, watching him, those yellow eyes bright with something that might have been amusement. It wasn't attacking, it was waiting. Above, in the tangle of the fallen cypress, he saw the woman, Natalie, scrambling down, splashing into the water, running, east, toward the boardwalk, toward safety. The creature watched her go, and then slowly, deliberately, it turned back to Andrew. Its mouth opened. When it spoke, the voice was his voice, his own words, played back to him from some impossible recording. "Unit 14 to dispatch. I have a situation." Andrew backed away. His feet found nothing but water and soft mud. "There's something." The creature took a step forward. "There's someone." Another step. Andrew's back struck the trunk of a cypress. Nowhere to go. "I need backup." The creature stopped close enough now that Andrew could smell it. Swamp rot and something older. Something that belonged in unmarked graves and forgotten places. Its face cycled through expressions, settling finally on something like curiosity. It reached out one long, jointed hand and touched Andrew's face almost gently. The fingers cold as the water, cold as the dead. Then it leaned close. Its mouth opened beside his ear, and it whispered, in a voice that was not his voice, not Natalie's voice, not any voice he had ever heard. "I'll see you again." It was gone. Between one heartbeat and the next, simply gone, as if it had never been there at all. Andrew stood alone in the flooded swamp, shaking, bleeding from a gash across his chest he didn't remember receiving, alive for reasons he would never understand. He found his way back to the station by instinct. Natalie Vance was already there, wrapped in a shock blanket, a deputy's cruiser waiting to take her to the hospital. She met Andrew's eyes as he emerged from the tree line. And in that look they shared something that would bind them forever. The knowledge of what lived in the swamp. What had always lived there. What would continue to live there long after they were both gone. The official report listed Andrew Harmon's injuries as sustained during a search and rescue operation in hazardous conditions. Natalie Vance was treated for exposure and dehydration and released after 2 days. Neither of them told anyone what they had seen. Who would believe them? What words could possibly describe the thing in the water? Andrew transferred to a desk position in Columbia the following spring. He told his supervisors it was burnout, the stress of too many years in remote postings. He told himself it was a reasonable career decision, a chance to be closer to family, to civilization. He didn't tell anyone about the dreams, the yellow eyes watching from flooded forests, the voice that was his voice calling from the dark, the whispered promise that echoed in his skull on quiet nights. I'll see you again. Congaree National Park remains open year-round. The boardwalk loops through the ancient forest, elevated above the swamp, safe and maintained and populated with tourists who come to see the massive trees and the unique ecosystem. Rangers patrol the trails. Search and rescue responds to the occasional lost hiker. Life goes on. But the old-timers in the low country tell stories. They speak of something that has lived in these bottomlands since before the first Europeans arrived, since before the first humans crossed the land bridge from Asia, a thing that watches, a thing that waits, a thing that wears the faces of those it hunts. The Gullah people call it by different names. The Cajun trappers who worked these swamps in centuries past had their own word, Rougarou, the shapeshifter, the stalker in the bayou, the thing that walks in the water. Andrew Harmon knows it doesn't matter what you call it. What matters is that it's still there, beneath the Spanish moss and the black water, patient as the ancient trees themselves, and it remembers his face. Location: Wind Cave National Park, South Dakota. Date: September 27, 2014. The cave exhaled. Ryan Calloway felt it before he heard it, a pressure change against his eardrums, subtle as a held breath released, as the massive underground system cycled air through its 150 miles of mapped passages. Wind Cave was a living thing, the Lakota had always said. The hole that breathes, standing at the natural entrance watching the morning mist drift up from the darkness below. Ryan understood why they'd considered it sacred, why they'd warned their children never to enter alone, why some of their stories spoke of passages that led not to other chambers but to other places entirely. 18 hours ago, 4 experienced spelunkers had descended into the fairgrounds section for a permitted exploration of unmapped passages. Their check-in time had come and gone, then their emergency window, then the long, terrible hours of silence. Ryan adjusted the straps of his rescue harness, running through his equipment check with the mechanical precision of 15 years' experience. Helmet-mounted LED, functional backup chemical lights secured, vertical gear, rope, ascenders, descenders, all inspected. Communication system, hardwired line running back to surface command, radio for short-range coordination within the team. First aid kit, emergency blanket, water, energy gel. The tools that kept people alive in places where human beings were never meant to go. His team assembled behind him. 4 rescue specialists from the National Cave Rescue Commission, plus 2 park rangers who knew Wind Cave's mapped sections better than anyone alive. 6 people to find 4. The math was simple. The cave, Ryan knew, did not care about math. Comms check, he said into his helmet mic. One by one, his team confirmed. The hard line to surface crackled with dispatch's voice. Surface reads you clear, Rescue 1. Be advised, barometric pressure has dropped 6 millibars in the last hour. Cave breathing is active. Watch for wind shifts in narrow passages. Copy, Surface. Beginning descent. Next check-in at the Fairgrounds Junction. Estimated 45 minutes. They entered the darkness. Wind Cave was not like other caves. There were no grand chambers here, no cathedral ceilings or underground lakes. Instead, the cave was a maze, an endless, branching network of passages that ranged from walking height to crawl spaces, barely wide enough for a human body. The rock was boxwork, a honeycomb of calcite fins that caught headlamp light and scattered it into 1,000 fragmented reflections. Beautiful in its way. But the beauty masked the danger. Every passage looked like every other passage, every junction identical, every turn a potential wrong turn into the unmapped darkness. Ryan led the team down the main tourist route, past the familiar formations, the crossroads, the post office, the Methodist church. These were the safe zones, the mapped and measured corridors that thousands of visitors walked each year. But the missing spelunkers hadn't stayed in the safe zones. Their permit had been for the fairgrounds, a restricted section where the passages grew tighter and the air grew thinner, and the boxwork gave way to something older, rawer, less touched by human presence. The temperature held steady at 54 degrees. It was always 54 degrees in Wind Cave, summer or winter, day or night. The darkness was absolute whenever Ryan switched off his headlamp. Not the darkness of a room with the lights out, but a darkness so complete that the human eye invented phantom lights, desperate patterns, anything to fill the void where sight should be. He'd trained in total darkness. He'd led rescues in total darkness. But he never got used to it. No one did. 40 minutes in, they reached the fairgrounds junction. Surface Rescue 1. We're at the fairgrounds. No sign of the party yet. Proceeding into restricted section. Copy Rescue 1. Be advised we've received no emergency beacon activation. Either their equipment failed or they can't reach it. Understood. The fairgrounds began with a belly crawl, 30 feet of passage barely 18 inches high, requiring each rescuer to remove their pack and push it ahead of them while squirming forward on elbows and knees. Ryan went first, his headlamp illuminating a tunnel of limestone that seemed to press closer with every inch. The rock scraped against his helmet, his shoulders, the small of his back. He could hear his own breathing amplified by the confined space, each exhale bouncing off the walls and returning to him like a second voice. He emerged into a larger chamber, larger being relative, perhaps 12 feet across and 6 feet high, and waited for the team to follow. One by one, they squeezed through the crawl space, faces tight with controlled discomfort. This was the part that broke most people. The knowledge that tons of rock hung above your head, that the passage behind you was the only way out, that if something went wrong down here, rescue might take days. Everyone good? Nods, tight smiles. They continued. The fairgrounds was a labyrinth. Passages branched and rejoined and branched again, creating loops that could walk a person in circles for hours. The missing group had been heading for a section called the Devil's Backbone, a particularly tight squeeze that led to allegedly unmapped territory. Ryan checked his survey map, cross-referenced with GPS coordinates that became increasingly unreliable this far underground. And then he heard it. A knock, clear and distinct, echoing through the passage ahead. He stopped, raised a fist for the team to halt. Listened. Knock, knock, knock. 3 beats, evenly spaced. A rescue signal. Someone was alive down here and they were tapping. The universal cave rescue communication when voices couldn't carry. Surface Rescue 1. We have audible contact. 3-beat knock pattern, approximately 200 meters ahead. Moving to investigate. Copy Rescue 1. Proceed with caution. Ryan moved forward, his team close behind. The knocking continued, guiding them through the maze. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats, pause. The acoustic properties of the cave made direction difficult to determine. Sound bounced off boxwork, traveled through rock, emerged from passages that led nowhere. But the knocking was consistent, always just ahead, always drawing them deeper. Hello? Ryan called out. This is National Cave Rescue. Can you respond verbally? The knocking stopped. Silence. The kind of silence that only existed underground, where there was no wind, no wildlife, no ambient sound at all, just the faint whisper of the cave breathing and the pulse of blood in Ryan's own ears. Then, from somewhere ahead, somewhere that should have been solid rock according to his map, a voice. Help us, please. We're trapped. Male voice, young, terrified. We're coming to you, Ryan called back. Keep talking. Where are you? Down here, down here, down. The voice cut off, replaced by the knocking again. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. But something was wrong with the rhythm now. The spacing was off, too quick, almost frantic. Ryan checked his map again. The passage ahead should dead end in another 100 meters. But the voice had come from beyond that point, from somewhere that didn't exist. Surface, we've got verbal contact. One male subject appears distressed. Map shows dead end ahead, but the voice is coming from beyond. Possible unmapped passage. Static answered him. Then faintly. Rescue 1. Breaking up. Say again. Surface, do you copy? The static resolved into something that might have been words or might have been the cave itself, speaking in frequencies almost below human hearing. Don't answer. Surface? Nothing. Dustin Webb had known something was wrong long before the headlamps started to flicker. The 4 of them, Dustin, Kevin, Melissa, and Paul, had been caving together for 6 years. They'd mapped sections of Mammoth. They'd pushed new leads in Lechuguila. They knew the protocols, respected the dangers, never took unnecessary risks. Wind Cave was supposed to be a vacation trip, a relatively easy explore before the weather turned and they scattered back to their regular lives. The Devil's backbone was tighter than expected. Dustin had gone first, squeezing through a passage that grabbed at his chest and forced the air from his lungs, and emerged into a chamber that wasn't on any survey. The others followed, excited by the discovery. An unmapped room in Wind Cave. That was something worth celebrating. The room was wrong, though. Dustin felt it immediately. The walls were too smooth, the ceiling too regular, as if someone had carved this space rather than letting water and time do the work. And the air tasted different here. Older, heavier, carrying a faint metallic undertone that reminded him of blood. "Do you guys hear that?" Melissa had asked. Knocking, faint, but distinct, coming from a passage on the far side of the chamber that none of them had noticed until that moment. Kevin had laughed, nervous. Cave acoustics, probably our own footsteps echoing back. But they weren't moving. None of them were moving. The knocking continued. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. Like a signal. Like an invitation. Paul had been the first to suggest they investigate. "Just a quick look," he said. "See where the passage leads." They had plenty of battery, plenty of air, plenty of time before check-in. Dustin should have said no. He felt the wrongness like a physical weight pressing against his chest, screaming at him to turn around, to go back through the backbone, to get out of this place that shouldn't exist. But the others were already moving toward the passage, their headlamps bobbing in the darkness, and he couldn't let them go alone. The passage descended, steeply, impossibly steeply for a cave system that should have been horizontal at this depth. Dustin's survey instinct screamed. This wasn't natural. This wasn't right. Caves didn't work like this. But the walls were limestone. The boxwork was real. Everything looked like Wind Cave should look. Just wrong. Subtly, terrifyingly wrong. The knocking grew louder as they descended. Melissa's headlamp flickered first, then Paul's, then Kevin's. One by one, the lights dimmed and died, leaving only Dustin's beam cutting through the absolute darkness. "Batteries," Kevin said, his voice tight with controlled panic. Everyone switched to backups. They switched. The backups didn't work either. "That's impossible," Melissa whispered. "I charged these yesterday, they're all—" The knocking stopped. In the sudden silence, Dustin heard something else. Breathing. Not his own, not his teammates. Something else. Something in the darkness beyond his headlamp's reach. Something that breathed in long, slow cycles like the cave itself. "We need to go," Dustin said. "Now. Right now." He turned to lead them back up the passage, and stopped. The passage wasn't there anymore. Where they had descended, there was now solid rock, boxwork fins extending from floor to ceiling without any gap, without any indication that an opening had ever existed. "No," Kevin said. "No, no, no." The knocking started again, but it wasn't coming from ahead of them anymore. It was coming from behind the wall, where the passage had been. Knock, knock, knock. And underneath the knocking, Voices. Dozens of voices, speaking in unison, speaking in words that weren't quite words. Come down, come down, come down with us. Ryan found the first body in a side passage that shouldn't have existed. Kevin Marsh, according to the permit roster. Male, 32, experienced caver. He was curled in a fetal position, his hands pressed over his ears, his face frozen in an expression that Ryan would see in his nightmares for years to come. No visible injuries, no indication of what had killed him. Just a man who had died of something that left no mark on the body. His headlamp was still attached to his helmet. The batteries were full. Surface, Rescue 1. We have a fatality. Kevin Marsh, no apparent cause of death. Continuing search for remaining subjects. The hardline crackled. Rescue, do not, knocking, repeat, do not. Surface, you're breaking up. Say again? But the line had gone dead, truly dead this time, not even static remaining. Ryan checked the connection, secure, checked the wire, intact. The communication system was working. Something else was wrong. The knocking resumed. Closer now. Much closer. Team, stay tight. Check your 6. They moved deeper into the passage, past formations that Ryan didn't recognize from any survey, through chambers that grew increasingly organic in appearance, walls that curved like ribs, ceilings that pulsed with shadows that moved wrong, floors that sloped downward at angles that made his inner ear revolt. They found Melissa Chen next, and then Paul Warren. Same posture, same expression, same impossible, markless deaths. But Dustin Webb, the 4th member of the party, was not with them. Dustin Webb, Ryan called into the darkness. This is Cave Rescue, can you hear me? Knock, knock, knock. The sound came from directly ahead, from a chamber that opened suddenly out of the twisted passage. Ryan swept his headlamp across the space and found him. Dustin Webb sat in the center of the chamber, his back against a column of boxwork, his hands raised in front of him. He was alive. Ryan could see his chest moving, could hear his breathing in the silence. But something was wrong. His eyes were open but unfocused, staring at nothing, seeing something that existed only in his mind. His mouth moved constantly, shaping words without sound. And his hands were moving in a steady rhythmic pattern. Knock, knock, knock. He was tapping his knuckles against the rock, over and over, without stopping, without variation. The sound that had guided them here, the sound that had led them deeper into the cave. Dustin, can you hear me? The man didn't respond, just kept knocking, his bloody knuckles striking the limestone, his eyes fixed on the darkness, his lips moving in silent conversation with something Ryan couldn't see. One of the team members stepped forward to grab him, and stopped. The shadows in the chamber were moving, not flickering, not shifting with the headlamp beams, moving with purpose, with intent, flowing along the walls and ceiling like living things, converging on a point directly above Dustin's head, and in those shadows Ryan saw faces. Not human faces. Something older, something that had lived in darkness so long it had become darkness. Eyes that were holes into nothing, mouths that opened on geometries that shouldn't exist, forms that suggested bodies but resolved into angles and depths that the human mind refused to process. The shadows were full of faces, and the faces were watching. Out, Ryan whispered. Everyone out, now. We can't leave him. We're not leaving him. Martinez, get him up, everyone else move. Martinez grabbed Dustin under the arms and hauled him upright. The man didn't resist, didn't react at all, just kept knocking his bloody hands together, kept mouthing his silent words. The shadows above them churned and writhed, and from somewhere in the darkness came a sound that Ryan would never forget. Knocking, hundreds of knocks, thousands, coming from every direction at once, from the walls and the ceiling and the floor itself, from the rock all around them, from the very bones of the earth. They ran, dragged Dustin through passages that seemed to shift and change around them, fought through crawl spaces that grew tighter with each inch, followed Ryan's compass when the maps became useless. The knocking followed them, always behind, always getting closer, a tide of sound that threatened to drown them in rhythm. The belly crawl out of the fairgrounds was the longest 30 feet of Ryan's life. He pushed Dustin ahead of him, forcing the unresponsive man through the narrow passage, feeling the rock press against his back like hands trying to pull him down. The knocking was so loud now he could feel it in his teeth, in his bones, in the spaces between his thoughts, and then they were through. The tourist section, mapped territory, safe. The knocking stopped. Ryan looked back at the fairgrounds passage. For just a moment, a fraction of a second that would haunt him forever, he saw something in the darkness. A face that was not a face, watching him with eyes that were not eyes, smiling with a mouth that opened onto nothing at all. Then it was gone, and there was only the cave, breathing in and out, patient and eternal. Dustin Webb was airlifted to Rapid City Regional Hospital, where he was diagnosed with severe psychological trauma of unknown origin. He remained unresponsive for 6 days, his hands continuing to tap against whatever surface they touched. The bed rails, his own body, the air itself. When he finally spoke, his first words were, "They're still knocking. Can't you hear them?" The bodies of Kevin Marsh, Melissa Chen, and Paul Warren were recovered and examined. Cause of death for all three was listed as cardiac arrest, though none had any history of heart problems. The forensic pathologist noted in her report that all three subjects displayed expressions consistent with extreme terror, though she could not speculate as to what might have caused such a reaction in experienced cavers. The section of Wind Cave where the bodies were found was sealed permanently. The official reason cited structural instability. The true reason was never documented, though the park superintendent who authorized the closure resigned 2 months later and moved to Florida, where the only caves were underwater and full of light. Ryan Calloway submitted his incident report with clinical detachment. 4 subjects located. 3 deceased, 1 survivor. Rescue complicated by communication failure and difficult navigation. No explanation for deaths or survivors' condition. He did not mention the shadows. He did not mention the faces. He did not mention the moment in the fairgrounds passage when he'd looked back and seen something that could not exist looking back at him. He requested a transfer to surface operations. The request was granted. But sometimes, in the deep hours of the night, Ryan wakes to a sound he cannot identify. A rhythm, distant and faint, like knocking on stone. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats. He tells himself it's the pipes in his apartment, the neighbors, the building settling. Normal sounds that the sleeping mind transforms into something else. He tells himself this, and he almost believes it. In Rapid City, Dustin Webb sits in a psychiatric ward and taps his fingers against the wall. The doctors have tried sedation, restraints, behavioral therapy. Nothing stops the knocking. Nothing even slows it. When asked why he knocks, Dustin smiles, a terrible smile that doesn't reach his eyes, and says, "I'm answering them. They're still calling. They want us to come down." He pauses, listens to something only he can hear, and adds, "They're so patient. They've been waiting so long. And the thing about caves is they go down forever, all the way down. There's no bottom. There's just more. More darkness, more depth, more of them." He resumes knocking. Knock, knock, knock. Somewhere beneath Wind Cave in passages that exist on no survey, the Tommy knockers wait. They have waited for centuries. They will wait for centuries more. Time means nothing in the dark. And they are always, always knocking back.